I'd like to ask you about your initial reaction to the tragedy earlier today.
Sadness, sympathy for the family of Charlie Kirk and all of those friends and supporters. I had a chance to meet with some people who had worked very closely with him after we got news of the shooting, and they were visibly shaken by the news. Political violence, as you've said, is not acceptable, and we've got to do everything we can as public officials to respect each other, to listen to voices, and to condemn this kind of violence when it occurs.
Well, Senator, there are questions, of course, about security that we have revisited a lot of times over the past couple of years. We just asked your colleague, Senator Mike Rounds, if it is time to have a more serious conversation about security details for members of Congress. This was not an elected official in this case, but there are great concerns about copycat. There are great concerns about lone wolves, and of course the series of threats that you've all been hearing in the House and the Senate. What is your thought tonight?
Well, the Congress has taken some steps in the last few years to look at security on the part of members. I know a number of my colleagues who have had security assessments done of the places where they live, and they feel better because of that. So I think we've got to take appropriate steps. And again, I think we have to condemn this kind of violence, this kind of political violence, and remind people that we're all Americans. While we may disagree on some issues, we've got to listen to each other, respect each other, and never allow this kind of violence to occur.
Senator, I'd like to talk about some other news from earlier today, especially from your perch on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. There have been reports, several reports, that Russia had drones when it came to Polish airspace, something that triggered not only some of them getting shot down by NATO members, but also ultimately Poland triggering Article 4 consultations when it comes to some sort of military escalation. Just walk us through your understanding of the conflict and where it may go from here.
Well, it is a dangerous step and escalation to have that kind of fallout of a NATO country. Poland has been raising concerns since the war in Ukraine began about Vladimir Putin and Russia's intent, not only in Ukraine, but against other NATO countries. We hear it from not just Poland, but from the Baltic countries about what the ramifications are and the fallout from the war in Ukraine. And we've seen it very dramatically in the last couple of days with respect to what's happened in Poland. So I think it's very appropriate that the Poles have invoked Article 4 and are asking to meet with other NATO allies about how to respond to this kind of inappropriate, just very bad attack from Russia. And even though they claim they're not aiming the attacks against Poland, the reality is because of what they're doing in Ukraine, because of their war against Ukraine, it's having an impact on the countries that neighbor Ukraine.
Well, considering your history with foreign policy, Senator, just the fact that we're having a conversation about Article 4 has got to have your antennas up. What more needs to happen before secondary sanctions are triggered?
Well, I think we should trigger secondary sanctions now. I think there are over 80 members of Congress who support the Graham-Blumenthal legislation, and I would hope we can bring it to the floor.
Senator, there is a question here that this has happened just days after reports of Americans pulling the United States of America pulling funding, security funding from Eastern European countries. Does the United States here need to have a show of force as the Europeans ramp up their defense? What's the U.S.'s role right now?
I think one of the real important measures that the United States has taken in the last few years with NATO has been to put additional troops on what we call the eastern flank, so the eastern border of Eastern European countries that border Russia. It's important for stability. It sends a strong message about what the intent of NATO is in protecting those countries who are members of NATO, and it sends a message to Russia that we are there, we are on the border. I think there is bipartisan support in Congress to continue those troop deployments, and we should be very clear that we are standing strong as an alliance against the kind of action that Russia is taking in Ukraine.
There are big questions about whether the government's going to be open on the 1st of October, Senator, and I don't know if you're hearing anything that you can help us find an answer here, because I understand that Democrats and Republicans are really not talking at this time. But if you do get to the table, there's the thought, and I know that John Thune doesn't seem very open to this right now, but there's a thought that extending Obamacare tax credits might be enough to get Democrats and Republicans on the same page with at least a continuing resolution to avoid a shutdown. Is that how this movie ends? Or are we really going to go dark at the end of the month?
Well, in fact, Democrats and Republicans are talking. We are talking. I serve as the ranking member on the Ag Appropriations Subcommittee. We have passed that bill from the floor of the Senate, and we are now going to conference with our House members to move that bill forward, and we're doing the same thing in the other bills that have passed the Senate. So I think it's premature to say that we're not going to continue to talk. We're not going to continue to move the appropriations process forward. Obviously, we're not going to get it all done by October 1st, so we're going to have to look at a continuing resolution for some period of time. And I hope as part of these discussions, we're going to look at the impact of the rollback in premium tax credits on people's health care in this country. Because what we know is that when people lose those tax credits, which help them afford health insurance, often they lose their health insurance. We have millions of people whose costs are going to go up because of the expiration of the tax credits. And we have, in New Hampshire alone, we have over 45,000 people who are expected to lose their health insurance. And what we've heard from the Georgetown University Center for Health Insurance Reform, from a study that we requested that they do, is the people who are going to be most affected by this are those who live in rural areas, working families, older Americans, the people who can, small business owners, the people who can least afford those cost increases.